Welcome to CISO Insider, Nightfall's chat with Chief Information Security Officers. We host CISOs from different industries to discuss their pathways to the role, the challenges they face in their everyday work, and lessons they can share with anyone aspiring to become a CISO. This podcast brings you into the world of cybersecurity and gives you a window into the most brilliant minds in the business. I'm Chris Martinez. Today on CISO Insider, it's our Season 2 finale with Datadog CISO Emilio Escobar. Emilio joins me to discuss data security approaches for today's cloud-first world. He shares how he sees infosec, creating security responses based on people and teams over brute force blocking of apps and systems. This approach allows Datadog to defeat the enemy of complexity in IT service quality and helps build a more inclusive culture at the company. By seeing data as trust, Emilio can influence his teams to find better solutions to data security problems and learn from typical pain points. We're excited to share this and more from our chat with Emilio in this episode. Please join me in welcoming Emilio to CISO Insider. All right, Emilio Escobar from Datadog, thank you so much for joining me on CISO Insider today.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you again for joining us, and we're going to get started with some questions on data security fundamentals. In your own words, why is data security so important to you in your role and for your company?
In my opinion, I think data is trust, right? So in our business at Datadog, our customers send us their observability data and logs, and they obviously trust us with it. So without proper data security, that means that they can't fully trust us as a vendor. So we have to give them the assurance that their data is handled with the utmost care and that they can benefit from their own usage of that data that means something to them and not somebody else being able to see it. So we have to have the right controls in place.
How has your experience as a security practitioner in the entertainment and media industry informed how you approach data security?
This actually was a good question. I had to think quite a bit about this. I think in the media and entertainment space, what it taught me or the experience gave me was the different cohorts of value of data. In security, right, you always prioritize data that has liability concerns behind it or regulatory requirements like personal data, intellectual property, credit cards, or what have you. But in the M&E space, you also have this whole subset of data that, unless you're in that space, you don't have to deal with, like creative content, which has its own life cycle, which is different than in other industries. So what's interesting about it is that content is a piece of data that is meant to be shared and seen and touched by multiple hands. As you're filming a show, there are multiple stages and different people who have to see it. And then at the end, you have an entire marketing team that is trying to broadcast that content as far out as possible. So it was interesting to deal and work with those teams to understand their business cases and how we can actually protect something that is sensitive to us, but yet still be able to be accessed by a bunch of people. So it's a different approach, right? It's like you have to rely on the people and not sort of use a typical Fort Knox point of view from security when it comes to data security.
Nice. And would you be able to tell our audience which companies you work for in the M&E space?
Yeah, so prior to Datadog, I was running security for Hulu, which is a video on demand and live TV streaming platform.
How do you approach the data sprawl problem in your everyday work?
So data, it's continuously growing, right? And a lot of people think that data is like garbage. The more you keep it, the more it starts smelling. But it has value and meaning to different teams and different business units. So we have to make sure that our customers have the proper tools that they need to handle and manage their everyday work. So we have a known catalog of services and tools that we use. We know where the data is, so we can help them apply the right level of controls, legal agreements. But then we also create an environment, and our culture is open to people can ask for new tools if the ones that we currently support do not meet their needs. And we enable that, right? So in a way, we're trying to reduce the whole probability of shadow IT, right? So that way we don't put a lot of blockers into people getting the tools that they need for their work. We actually enable and encourage that. And then we work with those teams to understand the lifecycle of data that I mentioned for what are we using for, who needs access, for how long do we keep it, and then just make it as much as possible, like set it and forget it. So they don't have to continuously think about that on top of their day-to-day work that they do, which is probably not security related.
We talked about shadow IT with Chris Sandalo at MongoDB. And if you would be able to define what shadow IT is for our listeners who don't know what that term means.
Shadow IT in its literal definition is, tools and applications and services that people are using that are not known to IT or security or whatever teams are tasked with maintaining those, or at least being the know of them, right? So that includes legal, for example. In my opinion, I think shadow IT is a good measure to track, right? So at Datadog, I also oversee IT, not just security. So for me, it's a good indicator for how well are we serving our customers. So do we have the right tools in place, or are they being forced, or they feel like they're forced to go elsewhere and get a tool because the current ones don't meet their needs? So I use that as a measure of more of like an IT service quality, or using a product terminology like NPS, like Net Promoter Score, for how much people trust IT, and that they can come to us and say, hey, I need this for X, Y, and Z reason, and we have a system built that way they can go get it.
Thanks for defining that. And I think that that's a really good segue into our next question. How does your team maintain visibility and security of critical data for the entire company?
So, at the very least, we rely on people, right? So the business units know what data they need, what's their value, what's their criticality. So we have a little bit of a hybrid approach where we have dedicated people, like an enterprise applications team, for example, and their charter is to make sure that when we onboard a vendor or a service, we're implementing the right guardrails or controls. If the tool is managed by, let's say, an operations team that sits under finance, for example, that they have the right knowledge and right mindset to know exactly how that needs to be protected. But we rely on them to tell us, okay, what is it that you need it for, what data, for what purpose, and in a way, make them also own the security of that, right? Like, I think it's hard to expand a culture of security is everyone's responsibility if you just have a few people doing it for everyone else. We focus more on enabling people being able to do it on their own. And then if they need an escalation or assistance, then we have that team that I mentioned to help them out with. And then we focus on building guardrails, right? On making sure that, hey, this is acceptable. Anything else beyond that is not, and here are the reasons why. So let's focus on that. And that goes from not just enterprise, but also on our service offering side, on the production side that we call production, making sure that we have those guardrails built in place and people understand the sensitivity of the data that we deal with.
As teams evolve and change the coding languages and tools that they use, what impact does this have on data security infrastructure?
Yeah, so we don't rely on the sort of blanket feeling that people are just using certain set of languages or frameworks and sort of blindly trust that as our mechanism, because the moment that changes, right, then we're sort of caught off guard. But we also realize that complexity can also be an enemy to security. So one of the things that we do benefit from is that we leverage a lot of managed services as much as possible. So our product offering runs in all the main cloud providers, and they have native services that they offer for data storage, databases, segmentation, what have you. So we rely on those as much as possible. And the benefit of that is that they come with security controls that can be applied by default. And that way, not everyone has to think about it. We just do it as part of leveraging those secure defaults when we're building out that infrastructure. So we know if they're storing data here, we know exactly that where it is encrypted, who has access to it, which applications can talk to it via segmentation. And we just build that into the configuration, regardless of the coding language that is used by the applications that are accessing those. We just support the formation languages that are supported by these cloud providers and enable that for the teams to use. Again, we just focus on those guardrails, right? And not trust that we have full visibility. We allow people to come to us with questions and we help them get there versus, checking boxes or what have you. And then also in addition to that, we build solutions for them so they can do what they do, but securely.
Next, we're going to get into some questions about the security leader role. What unique challenges is your security org facing in the new landscape of rapid cloud adoption and remote work?
So historically and moving forward, we've maintained a flexible work environment, right? So we have people who are fully remote. We are people who work in the office, and we'll have people who can do a little bit of a hybrid of that. So and then in addition to that, Datadog was born in the cloud, right? So not only do we offer products natively from the cloud, like I mentioned, but a lot of the services and vendors and software as a service that we use are cloud hosted. We have very little to no on-prem infrastructure, which is fun, right? Because then everything is in the cloud, but then the challenge is that everything is in the cloud, which means that anyone can access it because we can't rely on a hard perimeter to control who comes in or out. So the challenge there then is how do we then provide the right controls for that, right? And we talk about rapid cloud adoption and keeping up with new cloud products so that we can establish those guardrails that I mentioned to make sure that the secure defaults are being used, or that the teams can come to us with like, here are the secure defaults for this new service that we want to use, and then we have that conversation with them. The challenge also that we're dealing with on this hybrid remote work is the demand for hardware and developer workstation continues to increase. So now we focus on building remote or cloud hosted development instances for the developers, on top of staying on top of new cloud products and leveraging, like I mentioned, those internal experts as well. And then finally, we actually adopted hardware authentication pretty early. So 100% of our employees get a YubiKey, for example, when they get onboarded into Datadog. So everywhere you go or everywhere you try to access, it requires that challenge of having the hardware key for authentication. That makes it a little bit simpler in the sense of, if somebody gets phished or what have you, there's always going to be that step up challenge that gets requested with the token. Which has helped us really mitigate a bunch of the exposure or risk from that side.
Yeah, I think that leads into our next question. As a company that's undergoing massive growth, how has Datadog's approach to solving data security problems evolved with your company's growth?
So I think for us, or at least from my standpoint, I have the teams just focusing on continuous improvement, right? Our growth has been great, but with that, it comes you have different approaches for how to manage security. When you're 100 people company, then your approach to security is a little different than when you're over 2,000 people, right? Or over 1,000 engineers working on it. So, one of the things that our growth has given us, for example, is that we have certain parts of our platform that are very unique or specialized. One example could be that our compute environment, right, where we run our containers or Kubernetes clusters, because of our footprint and scale, it's required a very specialized team to run that and fine tune it and monitor and maintain those, where we trust that team with the security concerns of that environment because they hire the experts in that technology. And we have people who, for example, sit in the security SIG chair or co-chair for Kubernetes, right? Like we have that kind of expertise internally. So we definitely trust them with that. And they don't necessarily report to security, but they come with the expertise to do it properly. And then on top of that, we have people who within the security teams who act as advisors for different compliance frameworks or different implementations or technologies. So we can leverage them and embed them deeper with other teams to make sure that security concerns are being addressed appropriately. And then on top of that, we deliver value to customers by providing them with the tools that they need to be able to do things securely, like I mentioned. So that has been evolving as the company has continuously to grow. But very early, we build a culture where security is everyone's responsibility. And we have a pretty good dynamic where people come to us with questions. We work with them. I don't like checkboxes approaches. I don't like throwing things over the fence to other teams, right? So we continuously work on that to make sure that our security teams are deeply involved with product engineers or, let's say, finance or legal operations teams, what have you, on this to make sure that we're working with them alongside on making sure that their stuff is secure as well. So just enabling that trust that goes both ways. It's probably the best way for you to scale security, where you're building champions across your entire company. And that way you don't have to make sure that security has a one seeing eye everywhere, where it's definitely not going to scale for us.
And I think this next question may cover what you talked about here, but it's always good to get more elaboration. How are you addressing different security challenges among your infrastructure and different apps? Where have you identified the biggest gaps, and where are the biggest learnings coming from?
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we've covered some of this already. One of the things that I like to do is, I see needs of the business teams, people as a hierarchy, right? Like there are teams that still are in that survival primitive stage of needs, where they might need more constant feedback. They might need very basic support. And then also, but then you also have teams that are a little bit more advanced in their practice, and they might be in that self-validation stage where they have a good sense of what's happening within their environment, products or what have you, security wise, and they just need somebody to validate that what they're doing is proper, and that gives them that growth and that self-validation that they need at a higher level, right? So we have coverage for all of that. And for one example, for the self-validation could be a pen test, right? So if you have a team that is really good at doing secure design, whether doing their either their threat modeling or identifying failure domains, and working on implementations to address those, then we sort of test against that and see how well they're doing. And that gives them that continuous feedback for both internal and external, right? So we provide those services and continue to learn. Our best learning comes from feedback. I'm pretty transparent. I like to give feedback, but I appreciate feedback even more. And I always welcome and encourage people to give us feedback into how we're doing, where are we not doing well, where do we disappoint, where do we overpromise and underdeliver, and we learn from those and we learn from mistakes. So if everything is working fine, then we wouldn't necessarily change, right? So I always encourage people to give us constructive and criticism, so we can learn from. And we know nothing is perfect, right? So every time I hear a team say like everything is great, I always challenge that, because I'm sure there's one or two things that they thought of like, I wish I could have been able to do this, but security didn't allow me to, or we were not allowed to for any other reasons where security can potentially help.
And the next question may also elaborate on that, but it's always good to get more info. Where are the biggest hotspots or areas of concern for data security in your organization? And this can be general, like code repos or databases, or specific, like apps and other platforms that you use.
That's a good question. And I think, we have some unique needs based on what we do as a business, but we also have some overarching needs that I think the entire industry also has a problem with, right? So we've made significant investments in this problem already, but we continuously focus on the integrity of the software artifacts, right? So we, as a business, we build software that our customers trust us with, and they run those within their environments. So we continuously make investments in making sure that the trust level for that can continue to grow and maintain, and just keep learning with what's happening in the industry, right? Like the entire open source ecosystem and supply chain is very complex. So this is an area that we're continuously focusing on and investing in. So I think this is an industry hotspot, right? It applies to us a whole lot because of what we do. But every company out there, right? They obviously leverage open source technology, or they write open source technology, or they rely on critical vendors that leverage, a whole slew of supply chain. So it's something that we continuously think about and address it in areas that make sense for us, but also work with peers, industry peers, into new approaches, new lessons, and trying to solve that a little bit more collectively. But this is a hotspot that we continuously work on at the moment.
What's one hidden or lesser known skill that security leaders need to excel in their work on the security side and as a successful manager and coworker?
Yeah, I think this is an area that I spend quite a bit of time thinking about, and as I grow the teams and myself included, and I just have to say one word, right? Empathy, right? Like we have to focus on the people. We have to listen. I believe that security isn't a given, right? So the mantra of security needs to be done because of security doesn't really go well with business growth, right? Every business needs risk, and that's for it to be a healthy business. And our job is to make sure that the business is operating within the boundaries of risk that are acceptable, right? Not a riskless environment, but we know we have risks, but these are known and acceptable, or we're working towards it. And then it's a continuous journey, right? Like we chip away at progress and work towards a goal that continuously keeps evolving and moving. And I will say for security leaders, it's you have to find joy in that. And the only way you can successfully do that is by leveraging the people around you, not just security people, but everyone in the business. Because at the end of the day, everyone should want the business to be successful. So everyone should have a say into what that is. And you have to enable that success, right? So you can't make it everyone's responsibility, security to be everyone's responsibility. If you make security a black box that only cares about security, you have to get involved in the business and support other needs that might not be security related. This could be cultural needs, this could be growth needs, diversity needs, what have you. Like you need to be part of the business in order for the business to be a part of you.
We're going to take a brief break and get back to more questions with Emilio Escobar from Datadog. You're listening to CISO Insider from Nightfall AI.
Nightfall DLP is the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution designed for high-growth companies securing sensitive data across cloud apps like Slack, GitHub, and Google Drive. Traditional data security solutions are painful to implement, require heavy overhead, and have high false positive rates. Nightfall customers are up and running in minutes with our library of machine learning detectors to protect PII, PHI, and other industry-specific data. Our developer-centric platform allows security teams to configure content inspection as code for customizable data protection. Learn more at cisoinsider.com/nightfallai.
Our next up is our lightning round, which are questions that are designed to be rapid fire answers, but of course you can talk as much as you want about these questions. What motivates you to get out of bed every day as an infosec leader?
That's a good question because sometimes there are ups and downs, right? And sometimes it's like another day. But for me, it's really like the people I work with, not just my teams, my direct. It's the company, everyone involved, and the community. What motivates me every day is what new thing can I learn? I know this might sound a little bit tacky, but it's true. Is even like, okay, what new breach am I going to read about today that potentially my board is going to ask me about? Like, I welcome that because out of all of those, there are always lessons learned. And so I get motivated by learning, and that's what gets me out of bed. I manage, not just security at Datadog, so I'm learning a lot on the non-security side. So every time there is a challenge, let's say in the IT space, I actually enjoy it because it's something that it's new to me, right? And I learn from. So that's basically it. If I were to give it one word, is learning.
And I think this goes into our next question beautifully. What are the top 2 lessons you've learned from your team in the last year?
So, an important reminder, and I'm sure it came with lessons, is that people are generally, interested in everything that happens, right? People want to know what security or IT or any other team is thinking. Why are we doing things? How can we help? How does it impact me? How does it compare priority-wise to other priorities? And what are the trade-offs? So I think focusing on transparency is critical, right? People want to be in the know, people want to be involved, and people want to feel included, right? I think the most successful culture is one where you allow people to feel included in everything about it. And Datadog does a really good job at communicating business ideas, business directions, business reasons, business results with our employees. So that way they feel included and that their work actually matters. And it leads to more than just the day-to-day, sprint to sprint, OKR to OKR sort of view that you can have if you don't understand what the big picture is. So I think that was a good lesson learned. within the last year. I've carried that before, right? But it's always refreshing to see that as a reminder every day at Datadog now. The second of it is first time managing or overseeing IT. I have a great IT team and a great IT leader, and I've always had a customer first mentality, right? I did consulting for a long time early in my career, so that taught me to really be customer first. But in IT, that's even more critical, right? Because IT is a team where I've seen this in other places where, let's say, security makes a policy change, or let's say they want to implement even two-factor authentication, right? When two-factor was coming out, like when security teams would say, we have a new security policy where we must have two-factor authentication everywhere. It's usually IT that takes the brunt of it, right? And security most of the time is siloed. They just make the policy change, and IT has to deliver, and they're the ones dealing with the tickets, the comments of the users, the training of everyone. So what I've learned a lot with IT is having more visibility into that and how much of the customer story we have to focus on before we make drastic changes or any change in particular, and sort of deal with that change curve, right? And be transparent about why we're doing it and what's the outcome that we're looking for. So that's been a huge lesson for me in the last year.
How does your team approach data security when acquiring companies and integrating the workforce and systems of an acquired company?
So this is a good thing for us, right? Like we do have an active corp dev team. We're pretty much attached to the hip to them. So they loop us in when we're working on an acquisition, and they give us time to do the due diligence. So we basically do two types of due diligence depending on the company or environment or transaction that we're working on. So we have an overarching due diligence, which is based on questionnaires, interviews, right? We get documentation, policies, let's say, of the companies, if they have any. And then we give a pretty good risk picture of this potential acquisition to the business. So we know exactly like what are the hotspots that we need to worry about. For environments that have like their own infrastructure with customer data or any kind of data, then we also do security assessments of those, and then we work with the leadership of that company for addressing anything that we discover. So during the acquisition process, we act as an advisor and consultant for both, not just Datadog, but that a company that we're working with as well. So we inform the business, but also we help them get better. Let's say we decide for whatever reason that the transaction doesn't go through, then at least from a security standpoint, we help them get better with their environment or security posture. So that's how we stay there. And then on the integration part, using some of the teams that I already mentioned that we have, then we immediately work on a plan for how to actually migrate a lot of their data into systems that we currently use. So that way we know that the controls are applied. So instead of applying controls elsewhere, we just move the data where we know the controls are. Depending on the roadmap of that might be where maybe we do something on their systems for the time being, but then the outcome that we want is the data to move over because now we feel comfortable with what we have, and we don't have to worry about something new to maintain because again, complexity can be adverse to security.
Do you have any podcasts or books that you've read lately that you can recommend to our listeners?
A few. I enjoy the Hacker Valley Studio podcast, the CISO Series podcast. One that is not directly related to security, but security does come up here and then, but it's a really good podcast to understand sort of like business landscape, investment from a venture capital, just like startups, like business idea, go to market, which I think every security leader should actually be involved in with their own company or at least understand what it is. It's a Pivot with Kara Swisher. As far as books, I read The Culture Code. I thought that was really interesting for how to build culture that enables growth and success of the business. And then one book that I always recommend is What You Do Is Who You Are from Ben Horowitz, where he focuses on building a culture within your organization, team, company, depending on the scope or scale that you operate in right now, that really resembles who you are as a person, because that then comes natural. It doesn't seem fake, and then you can actually scale it and maintain it for the long term versus if you're going away from what your true beliefs are, then people are going to catch you on that lie pretty quickly. So I like that book because the way he writes it and some of the case studies that he presents are not even business related, and they're really, really good to read through and learn from that mindset. So I definitely recommend that one.
Do you have anything you'd like to promote, like your social media channels, any articles you've written or your team has written, or anything else?
Well, for sure, check us out. We're always hiring. I always feel like I have to promote that. Yeah, follow us on social media. I'm on social media as well. If you want to follow me, I mostly post sarcastic comments on Twitter, but happy to chat about anything industry-wide related as well. And definitely promote your local security chapters, whether OWASP or what have you, and any local diversity groups that might be local to you in your area. Definitely look them up and join them because we're trying and hopefully we can get opportunities where the talent is and address with the so-called cybersecurity skill gap that way, where hopefully opportunities can make it to where the talent is and address that divide that way. So definitely shout out to all of them who are doing the hard work out there to get help solve the opportunity divide.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the opportunity divide. That it's really a monumental event for me to have you on this podcast because it's two Latinx people talking about technology. And when does that ever happen?
I know, exactly, right? So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Emilio, the CISO from Datadog. I had a wonderful time talking with you today. And thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to CISO Insider, a podcast created and sponsored by Nightfall AI, the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts. The ratings and reviews help more people find us. Special thanks to Wendell Topper for podcast production support. Learn more about Wendell's work at www.createch.us. That's CREATEK.us. Follow Nightfall on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Nightfall AI. That's Nightfall AI, and email us at marketing@nightfall.ai with questions, feedback, and suggestions about CISO Insider, including suggestions for CISOs you'd like to hear from. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next time.